This is the WTF Bach podcast. The podcast about Johann Sebastian Bach, brought to you by his prodigal son, WTF Bach. Join WTF Bach as he guides your mind through a contrapuntal journey. Why don't you let WTF Bach guide you? And now, here's WTF Bach.
WTF Bach here, 99 episodes into this contrapuntal journey, and there's a new album today. Volume 4 in my complete Bach works is here. First link in the description. If you decide to turn off this podcast and go listen to that instead, I would not mind. If you want to listen to both, why then you'll be a man, my son. What is this album about? What is this entire project about? I don't think I talked about the idea of a, quote, complete set of Bach when I began this project with the initial 3 albums about a year ago. But let me give you a quick introduction to the problems of the idea of complete, because, spoiler alert, complete is a misnomer. There is no such thing as a complete collection of Bach. I mentioned this idea to the pianist Evelyn Crochet. She's a great Bach pianist, wonderful person. She recorded both books of the Well-Tempered Clavier, and she responded, you young people, you always want to complete this. You always want to do this to completion. But we, older pianists, we used to be interested in recording the best this, the best that. Why is there this need for completion? Yeah, that got me thinking, why do I need to do the complete Bach? I truly suppose the best answer is that it keeps me working. It makes me feel like there's loads to be done. Years of recording before I can retire, to my study, smoking a pipe, grinning from ear to ear. But she's right, this modern generation of musicians, and maybe not only musicians, maybe everyone has this need to complete things, as if you're ticking things off a list. Complete tourism in every, Southeast Asian country, check. Complete Scarlatti sonatas, check. It's a sense of accomplishment for sure. Maybe it's that we're trying to define ourselves. Who are we? And this is the sort of thing that helps. I'm the person that did the complete Bach. However, I tend to agree that those that have the philosophy that says, do it well rather than do it all, yes, they are right. But what you're going to do, I am in too deep. But let's just say, okay, you're going to try to do the complete Bach. How does one get to completion? I think you realize very soon that it is a vague concept, if not just simply an impossible concept. Volume 1, for example, of my complete works kicked off with a work that was considered of doubtful authenticity right up until the 21st century. This is not a work, therefore, you'll hear Glenn Gould recording or Andras Schiff. Angela Hewitt's complete Bach does not have this or any of this repertoire. Does that mean that she didn't record the complete Bach? So there's this aspect that not new works, but old works that are suddenly deemed authentic Bach, they start to creep up in your perception of this composer. And I've said many times about how that is very symbolic, really, of our collective knowledge, that there's a work, a piece of music that's been here right in front of our noses for centuries, and suddenly it's deemed authentic. Nothing changes in the work. It's still the same music, the same notes, but we've changed. Our knowledge has grown, and now suddenly our expanded knowledge includes this amount of works. It reminds me of Jack Kerouac, who says in his Scripture of the Golden Eternity, many Beatnik fans out there listening to this podcast, quote, Einstein measured that this present universe is an expanding bubble, and you know what that means. Right, so we have the aspect of a great amount, actually, not just 1 or 2 works, but a great amount, several hours at least, of music that will either be regarded or discarded as authentic. So completion, in that sense, might mean, for the person attempting completion, where did they stand in relationship to collective scholarship? At what point were they in the scholarship's history when attempting completion? Now, there may be new works discovered. If during my run at the complete Bach there is some discovery of the new Bach work, I guess I'll pick up my feet and record that. Wouldn't that be exciting? What about a fragment of music? I mean, there must be incomplete pieces. Obviously, there's the Art of Fugue. In a certain era, I think that these works would have been avoided, but I tend to think now that people really love the fragments of works. On volume 3 of my own set, there's a lovely prelude in E minor that is, 25 seconds long, because that's where Bach stopped writing. And maybe you don't want to start your Carnegie Hall debut with a 25-second incomplete prelude, or do you? But I think that especially in Bach, hearing how perfectly polished, how unbelievably finished sounding a fragment of music is, and then hearing it just break off in silence, that's very interesting for us, for me at least. Where was it going? It's quite amazing. Here, for example, is a fantasy for organ that is incomplete, and you may, in the course of these few seconds of music, forget that this piece is incomplete. I would say, oh, what a shame that that piece isn't finished, but I think it's nice like that, and our cup overfloweth with the amount of Bach works for organ that are complete. That is BWV 573. I may throw that up on my Bandcamp site as a freebie. Anyhow, that's to say that I will actually try and record all these little fragments of keyboard music lying around, though they're not many. Now, on to a deeper problem. In Bach's day, music was so organic that the term keyboard meant any number of types of keyboard instruments that were in existence. Therefore, the well-tempered clavier, it means not, as was translated in some early English editions, the well-tempered clavichord, but the well-tempered instrument with keys. Any instrument that has a keyboard, play this music on that. And this meant for Bach the harpsichord, the clavichord, the organ, later in his life, the forte piano, and even within those instruments, there are many types of those instruments. The harpsichord, while you have virginals, where the strings go not from front to back, but from left to right, they have a different range of keys. You have harpsichords with multiple manuals, different numbers of stops. You have a pedal harpsichord. You have a lute harpsichord. You have pedal clavichords. You have, of course, the organ, which if you spend even 5 minutes studying the organ, you realize that no two instruments are alike in the world. And speaking of repertoire that sort of goes between the lines, blurs the boundaries of what instrument, there's a collection called the Neumeister chorales, which was discovered in 1985, mind you, speaking of new works. These are chorale preludes that were written only as if played by the hands. There are very few indications where to play the pedal, but the implication is that should you have a pedal board, you'll add the pedal lines as you go. But if you have an organ that lacks pedals, go and play these pieces as they appear on the page. But then if you can play these pieces with the hands alone and no feet, are they keyboard works or are they organ works? And what is the difference between keyboard and organ? You see where I'm going with this? Is there really a divide between the organ music and the keyboard music? There is, in the way that the music is published today in the Neue Bach Ausgabe, the NBA. The organ music is published as Series 4 and the keyboard music as Series 5. And maybe you're tempted to say, the difference is in the sound, that those instruments that can sustain indefinitely, like the organ, is one series, and those instruments with a decaying sound, like the harpsichord or clavichord, etc., that's a different series. But, of course, you go back to Bach's day, and it's not so clear. The fantasy, I'm thinking of one piece, BWV 904. It says on the title page of one of the essential sources, Fantasy Manualiter, that is, fantasy for the manuals of an organ, and now it's deemed a very standard harpsichord work, but back then it was understood to be an organ work. Even more confusing matters. Forkel, Bach's first biographer, his student Griepenkerl, Griepenkerl, if you want some Bach trivia, Griepenkerl's Forkel's student, he writes in 1844, of the 6 sonatas, those sonatas that we commonly call the organ sonatas, and the Passacaglia, he writes, actually, the 6 sonatas and the Passacaglia were written for a clavichord with 2 manuals and a pedal. So this is music that has a decaying sound. So where's the divide here between keyboard and organ? One final morsel of food for thought. Bach, the great teacher, sometimes made exercises in his students' notebooks in a type of shorthand called partimento that looks like figured bass, only it's not the bass that has figures, it's all the other voices. A huge topic, partimento. I know of a gentleman who has an entire blog devoted to partimento practice. I mean, when you are quite deep in Baroque keyboard playing, all roads lead to partimento. But the point is, these are keyboard exercises for students. But when you realize them well, they make perfectly good performance pieces. So what do you do with those? Do you record those on the complete Bach works? What is the difference between a vehicle for learning and a, quote, work of art? What happens is you need to rethink your idea of what a finished piece of music is to people in this era. The bottom line, completion is a modern concept. It's all to say that there is no such thing as a complete edition. It's simply a marketing ploy. It helps sell records. So yes, go out and buy my complete works of Bach, Volume 4. I mean, why, after all, would you buy the incomplete Bach when you can have the complete Bach? Anyhow, I hope that gives you some aim of this project. There will be a lot of pieces that the casual listener has not heard, and I dare say there will be a lot of pieces that even the professional classical musician has never heard. But this volume, Volume 4, this is not that. Very common repertoire. This record is the Partitas numbers 1, 2, and 3, the first half of Bach's 6 Partitas. And instead of doing what I have often done, a performer's commentary, where I sort of speak over the entire album, I'll do just a bit of a deep dive into the history of these pieces. I won't play the entire record, but just give you a brief introduction.
The podcast about all things Johann Sebastian Bach, brought to you by his prodigal son, WTF Bach. This is the podcast about everything Bach. Everything Johann Sebastian Bach. Today you're listening to the podcast about all things Bach, including all things WTF Bach.
And we've got a new sponsor to help with today's release, a distribution company called Modern Classical X. We are thrilled to have their support in distributing this record. And what I like about them is that unlike CD Baby and DistroKid and other services I've used in the past, Modern Classical X will distribute this release to Apple Classical and Instagram. Something, I know it sounds very particular, but something that really annoyed me about releasing the previous albums in this collection on CD Baby was that I couldn't find my music on Instagram. But now with the help of Modern Classical X, that will not be a problem. And I've got a promo for you, the listener. If you are a classical musician and you're looking for a way to get your album onto Spotify, onto Amazon, or wherever you listen to music, go to modernclassicalx.com and use the promo code WTFBach, capital WTFB, lowercase ach, and you'll get a free distribution of a single, an EP, or an album. Try it out. Get your music on Spotify. Let me know if you need any more information. They also have mastering services, artist help, playlists, all kinds of stuff. So go check out Modern Classical X, and thanks very much to them for sponsoring this episode. The Partitas, the Partitas, these are often called Bach's first publication. It is, in fact, Bach's Opus I. I say often called because there is one exception. It's sort of an odd thing. When Bach was 22 years old, there was a cantata that was published during Bach's lifetime. That's actually the first piece of music that was published during Bach's lifetime. Publishing is an interesting thing. It means something very different from what we think of today. When you say, are you a published author? We mean, have you any worth? But, for Bach, he never published the Well-Tempered Clavier, the cello suites, the Passions. None of that was published. So it's clearly not a mark of quality. It's probably more a matter of accessibility. Anyhow, Bach arrives with a job in Leipzig. He's Thomas Cantor. He succeeds the famous composer named Johann Kuhnau. Perhaps you've heard of the biblical sonatas of Kuhnau. Kuhnau dies in 1722. Bach arrives soon after to take up his duties. And Bach, so conscious of what his predecessors have done, so thoroughly conversant with the past, steeped in what's been done in music, he publishes this collection of keyboard music. It might well be considered a tribute album to Kuhnau. What did Kuhnau do? Well, in 1689, he published a collection of keyboard music called Neuer Clavier-Übung I, the new keyboard practice, right? Übung, practice, and Clavier, that all-consuming word, which we've already mentioned means anything with a keyboard. This is a collection of what Kuhnau calls 7 partiers, P-A-R-T-I-E-S. These are 7 pieces in the major mode, all the white notes except for B flat. Then he publishes in 1692 the Neue Clavier-Übung I. So we've had the first part, and now we have the other part. And this collection, the Neue Clavier-Übung I, is 7 partiers in the minor mode. Now we've got all the white keys in the minor mode, C minor, D minor, E minor, F minor, G minor, A minor, B minor, followed by a sonata in B-flat major. So maybe you've noticed that the last pieces in both Clavier-Übungen were in B-flat major. That's where Kuhnau finishes his Clavier-Übung. And Bach says, that's where I'll begin mine. So now Bach arrives in Leipzig and he begins publishing a Clavier-Übung, which is 6 partitas, not 7. It's funny, Bach doesn't want to outdo his predecessors. It's just amazing to see how he takes his predecessor's work and alters it slightly in subtle ways. He's not saying this is better. He's saying this is maybe newer. Maybe we've learned this much more. Firstly, there's the title page of each. It's like your 18th century album cover. I'll include both title pages on the Substack post. Kuhnau's title page next to Bach's title page. It's such a tribute album. It looks exactly the same. The style, two very similar looking album covers. And the language in both is very similar. Here is Kuhnau's Clavier-Übung page. It says, Neuer Clavier-Übung, erster Teil, bestehenden 7 Partien aus dem Ut Remi oder Tetra Maggiore eines jedes Tones, allen Liebenharten zu sonderbarer Armhelligkeit aufgesetzt und verlegt von Johann Kuhnau, Leipzig anno 1689. Okay, sorry for all that German. It is new keyboard exercise first part consisting of 7 partitas in Ut Remi, or Do Re Mi, or the tetrachord major of each key. That little bit right there means that people's conception of major and minor was a bit more nuanced than we might think of it today. It has to have this major tetrachord in it. Interesting. And then it goes on, Liebhaben zu Sonderbare is the composed for the special delight of the enthusiasts, published by Johann Kuhnau. Bach says something very similar. It says Clavier-Übung bestehenden Präludien, Allemanden, Couranten, Sarabanden, Gigen, Menuetten und andere Galantieren. These are the names of all the dances that will appear, and andere Galantieren and other gallantries. And then he has similar language here. Denen Liebenhaaren zu Gemütsergötzung verfertiget. Composed to the spiritual delight of music lovers. And then you have Johann Sebastian Bach and his title of the director of church music in Leipzig. Opus I, it says at the bottom, published at the author's expense. Now, what I really love about both is that they are composed for the delight of music lovers. I personally tend to forget about that. I get wrapped up in, this is my job. I'm trying to make these recordings absolutely cutting edge and competitive. But for most of us in the world, those fortunate enough with these resources, we pick up a page of this and think, this is wonderful. This little bit here is difficult. And then our day continues after that brief, exactly spiritual delight. That's what this music is. So we've set the scene. Bach keyboard practice, part 1, picking up in B-flat major where Kuhnau has finished his own keyboard practice, and off we go. A note on the sound of the record. What instrument am I playing? I haven't told you. Am I going to play the piano, the harpsichord, the clavichord? Yes. The instrument, I could call it an organ, clavichord, harp, lute. What does it mean? It's a modern keyboard instrument. It should sound somewhat like a collection of Baroque instruments because the engineer at Yamaha and we sampled Baroque instruments very carefully for months. Celtic harp, a very old lute, and a lovely clavichord. We sampled them and then combined the sounds by running them through the sounding board of an acoustic piano. This is Yamaha's amazing technology called the transacoustic piano. So I repeat, this is not sound coming through a speaker. This is me playing a piano and the sound coming through the very soundboard of a piano, only the piano strings are not struck with the piano hammer. They're sort of sympathetically vibrating. So what you get is, I think it's very well said, it's a transacoustic experience. Now, these instruments are extremely soft, the clavichord, the lute, the harp, so we did not amplify the sound of any of these instruments. That is sometimes done with disastrous results when you amplify the sound of your clavichord, because the world of the clavichord is so infinitely complex that to sort of blow it up to our modern perception really distorts things and can be quite bad, can be quite ugly sounding. This sound is very, very quiet, so that's to say you will hear me breathing on this record, you'll hear my clothes rustling, etc. I say it's an organ-like instrument because we've registered, in the sense of of organ playing, we've registered all of these instruments so that you'll get, when you play one note, an octave below, the octave of, and an octave above, and sometimes the fifth in between. So rather than the sound of one instrument, you get a family of instruments playing in different octaves. Now, maybe the purists are gritting their teeth right now saying, why? But I respond to that because this is a keyboard instrument in our world. This is the Clavier-Übung in the truest sense, so let's Übung on this. We recorded this album over 3 days, but we spent the first day trying to find the sound, and then the second day we thought, we've got the sound, so we recorded all the repertoire on the second day, went home and listened to it and thought, we can't release this. This sound is not right. It's too, I don't know, there's something. Let me give you a demonstration. So here is, for example, a registration that we deemed unsuccessful, unusable. It is the same combination of instruments that eventually made its way onto the record, but the registration in terms of which instrument was an octave above, which one was an octave below, this sound is unacceptable. And I realize we're at the 20-minute mark, so if you need a cigarette break, here's your 20-minute warning, because music is about to start in 5, 4, 3... Right, so can you hear the combination of instruments? It's a bit funky sounding. It's not as bad as I thought it was several months ago. But we decided against that registration. And the same combination of instruments, now registered in a different way, goes onto the album like this. This is the minuet from the first partita. Save the repeat for when you listen to this album in its entirety. Can you hear how different that is? Obviously, the takes that didn't make it onto the record are not mastered in the same way, so the sound is different. But just the blend of instruments, can you see that this is, at least in my mind, keyboard practice in today's world? It's the same combination of instruments, but now registered in a different way. It's the art of organ registration, but through this modern lens. Now, here's something you can do on the harpsichord or organ between repeats, right? Often Baroque dances are repeated, and the first half might have a different registration, a different color from the second half. Now that's convenient here on this setup because I simply hit a button and bam, new registration. So let's go over to the third partita, the Allemande, and we'll listen to the ending of the first half of the Allemande and then the first half repeated with a new registration. I'm just going to fade that out here because that is quite subtle. So I'm going to play just the last few bars of the first half, and then into the second half. What you're listening for is a new sound added up high. It's as if I pulled out a higher stop on the organ. Listen to the difference just in the high register here. See if you can hear it. And now the high registration goes away on the second half. Maybe you can begin to pick out some of those instruments up there. That's probably the harp very up high. Certainly the clavichord sound coming through in the bass. The bass is very quiet on this record. You hear a lot of the clicking mechanism or the grinding mechanism of the clavichord down low and the lute possibly in the middle. In any case, I hope what you hear is a unique sounding instrument and hopefully a unique experience to these three partitas. Let me give you the opening of the first partita the way it does not appear on the album. So another example of a registration which was rejected, but hopefully you enjoy. Yes, and just for comparison's sake, here is the registration that went on the record. I think there is a lack of that high octave up top. So there you go. The second minuet in this partita, the B-flat major partita, is one of my favorite pieces, probably in the whole Bach repertoire. Just a small little thing, 2 lines of music, but it's a joy to hear and a joy to play. Here it is. Yeah, here's a preview. You hear that damping mechanism, that here, listen to that again. That sound, depending on how violently or gently you take off your foot of the sustain pedal on the piano, will play a sample of our hands muting the strings on the harp or the lute. So a pretty cool thing. You don't quite get to hear that that silence, that pronounced, articulated note off when you're playing a modern piano. But certainly when you're playing earlier forte pianos and you release the damper pedal, it makes quite a pronounced noise, like the sound is no longer here. And just for, I was just thinking, gosh, I've been playing this piece pretty much my entire life. Here is how I used to play it in 2004. So this is now 21 years ago, playing that same little minuet. Let's see if I've improved or maybe I've gotten worse, who knows. I don't know what to say about that. That's actually 2010 now that I think about it, not 21 years ago, but long ago enough. I think, I don't know what I think. Gould talks about the sins of his youth. What you've just witnessed there is certainly one of the sins of my youth. Okay, let's go on to one of the other partitas. How about the second one? There is, in the second partita, the opening. It is always problematic for keyboard players because double dotting, the problem of double dotting. See, you couldn't make a double dot with your rhythm, meaning that if you wanted to have something, a solid beat followed by a soft beat that was dotted, it would require a sort of modern writing that didn't exist in the time. So what Bach writes on the page for the second partita is bum, 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 ba-dum, bum, bum, ba-dum. The question is, did Bach mean bum, ba-dum, 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 ba-dum? So the difference, do you play this without the dot, or do you play this with a bodot, Now, it's a question I asked Robert Hill in this podcast. He mentioned that the tempo marking grave adagio is a very unique tempo marking in Bach, and in fact, I think I've only found it in one other place where there is, again, a case of the double dotting issue. Now, I used to side with the early music scholars that would say, oh, of course, this is Bach's way of writing a double dot. And my teacher, Jerry Lowenthal, said, but what if Bach actually wanted bum, bum, ba-dum? How would Bach have written that? If that's the rhythm that Bach wanted, how would he have written it? And, of course, with a great teacher, you go through many stages. First, you worship him, and I thought, of course, he's right. Then you grow apart from him, and you think, of course, he's wrong. And then later, you realize he was right. And it's very interesting. You'll hear harpsichordists now approaching this music with that feel, whereas harpsichordists, I'd say 30 years ago or something, would say, you pianists don't know what you're doing by playing bum, bum, so I'm going to show you ba-dum, ba-dim. But now the trend is to play exactly what Jerry Lowenthal said. So here are a couple different openings of my second partita. You could see I was really experimenting with what to do. Which one would I end up with? I think in the end, I may have used that second take there, but you can see even between takes, I'm choosing a few of them to dot, a few of them to double dot, go between the eyes of the bull, for those of you familiar with the etymology of dilemma. I've mentioned on this podcast before a crucial source known as source G25 with regard specifically to the partitas. In partitas 2 and 3, there are revisions that would alter the text in such a way that is actually quite dramatic. These revisions don't reach, I would say, your average student or even your average professional not digging quite deeply enough. The publishing companies such as Bärenreiter or Henley, they choose to withhold some of these revisions for certain reasons. They have to exclude them from their scholarship. But Christoph Wolff has written that these revisions possibly came from Bach himself. In one of these sources, we have in this very movement, the opening of the second partita, 2 tempo markings that it would appear would certainly alter the way that this music is played. So I'm just going to zoom in to a section here in this opening movement of the second partita. Okay, this is marked as andante, going. Now you have a fermata here, and this is where the first tempo indication is. In this source G25, a person, possibly Bach, writes allegro over these 30-second note scales. And then on this trill here, the second tempo indication, adagio. Okay, now this is of crucial importance to you if you play this second partita, because without these extra tempo indications, what you have is a bunch of 30-second notes all under one tempo indication, andante, right? But here in this source G25, we've got 3 separate and very different tempo indications, from andante sort of moving to allegro, play the scale quickly, right? And then at this transitional passage before this 2-voice fugue, adagio, play it quite slowly, or play it comfortably rather. So here it is again, this transition passage with these new tempo markings. Andante, allegro, adagio, fugue, and yes, I'll fade out just so you go listen to the record. I will read from Wolff what he says on those transitional tempo markings there. He says, quote, "The concluding passage of the andante section in the Sinfonia of Partita 2 can be recognized in its function as a transition to the fugue section, even without a given tempo indication." Right, okay? So he's saying, I think a knowledgeable player would see those 2 tempo indications as inherent. He goes on, "Yet the added tempo markings reveal very definite intentions as to declamation and structuring. They identify a quicker and slower phrase each. Added to this is the more highly defined rhythmic formation for the second quarter of bar 29, which in its correspondence to the ending figure on the preceding quarter note value shows an obvious improvement as compared with the uncorrected version of the engraving, and that given in the Neue Bach Ausgabe. It seems also to agree well with the entry of a trill, found only in source G25. To sum it up, the entire revision in G25 offers welcome directions for the realization of this passage in performance." So I will put a link to my own episode on what happens in the third partita in this same source G25. But I think this should be a pretty big, sign to us that even if we're going to a scholarly text such as the Neue Bach Ausgabe, I mean, this is a body of scholars all trying to present the most correct text. And then you've got another guy like Christoph Wolff saying, well, actually what they left out was this source here. They had to leave it out for various reasons. But if you look at this could be even more correct. So never stop digging, never stop looking for the true deepest layer of textural understanding that you can get. What else can I say about this album? Go out and listen to it. I mean, thanks really for all your support. I think this project is giving me a sense of purpose. Perhaps. I mean, maybe. I don't know. In any case, it does give me joy to know that some of you might listen to it. Call your local radio station and ask them to play it. I love seeing that my music is being played in this town and that town, and it's wonderful. Spotify links, iTunes links, all the links you need to get this album are in the description. I got a lot of lovely feedback about the readings on the previous episodes, so thanks. Your warm notes melt my heart, and I will continue to read fiction on this show. Perhaps that is the direction this podcast could take after episode 100. I don't know, some short stories, and then Bach, something like that. Like I said, episode 100. Next, I'm very excited. A special guest, one of the most prominent and decorated people in the world of Baroque music will be on the show. Maybe you already know who it is. As for signing up on Substack, Gabby, in a moment, will tell you that the best way to support the show is to become a paying subscriber there. This is true. But even if you can't pay, signing up on Substack is free, and you should do it because it makes this show actually climb in the ratings there, which will make this become more visible. I got a few emails last week from Substack saying that this show about Bach, think about that, this show about Johann Sebastian Bach is floating somewhere between the top 40 and the top 100 shows about music. That is pretty cool, given the niche qualities of the show, the specialized nature of this show, that it could get such love. That is excellent, and that is because of your help. So thank you. Sign up there, even if you don't plan on paying. It will be a big help as we aim to release the episodes after number 100. I'll give you Gabby now, and then I'll play from the ending of the new record. You listened to this far to this episode, so you get the ending of the album. And thanks very much for listening. See you soon.
Thanks for listening to the WTF Bach podcast. We couldn't make this podcast without the support from listeners like you. The best way to help this podcast along is to become a paid subscriber on Evan's Substack. So if you join for as little as $80 a year, just $80, you'll be helping us out tremendously. You can also make a one-time donation on Venmo, Cash App, or PayPal. All relevant links are found in this episode's description. And we want to hear from you. So if you have an idea, a favorite piece, or a suggestion, give us a shout at bach@wtfbach.com. We get notes almost every week from every corner of the globe, and it makes our days to hear from you. So thank you for listening.